The granite tower of the Black Rock Lighthouse stood on a fang of rock that ripped the Irish Sea apart. It was a place where solitude was not a choice but a brutal, deafening constant, a state of being dictated by the ceaseless howl of wind and the indifferent smash of wave against stone. It was 1995, and Arthur Pendelton, the last soul keeper of the Black Rock, carried the silence in his bones. He was a man defined by routine and isolation, his world shrinking daily to the perimeter of the catwalk and the metallic, rhythmic clack-clack of the clockwork mechanism that rotated the great lens. His current logbook lay, open on the brass table beneath the massive, multifaceted lens. The scent of salt and oil was thick in the air. Arthur's job was simple, elemental, to tend the light, to ensure it's powerful. Cutting beams swept the darkness at the mandated intervals. Tonight, however, the silence felt different. It was pregnant, thick with a cold, almost visible expectation. The fog had rolled in early, a consuming white blanket that swallowed the horizon and muted the rhythmic shriek of the foghorn. Leaving Arthur utterly alone in a circle of stone and glass, he began the lighting sequence for the night. The clockwork mechanism was wound, the massive lens a flawless, 3-ton marvel of engineering began its slow, deliberate rotation. As the main beam ignited, a focused, blinding white column of light cut through the thick fog. Arthur stood, as he did every night, and watched the sweep. The beam was supposed to slice the distance, illuminating the churning black water, but tonight, the fog turned the light back on itself, trapping the colossal energy. Within a few 100 feet of the tower dot, it was in this trapped light that the anomaly first appeared. Not in the distance, not on the sea, but in the center of the massive lens itself. As the light passed through the flawless glass, it didn't just illuminate the fog. It cast something onto the fog, like a film projector displaying an image on a dense screen. It was fleeting, visible for only a fraction of a second as the lens swept past his vantage point. But it was horrifyingly clear, a dark, static-filled image of a man, his face contorted in a silent, final scream. Surrounded by the splintered wood and broken glass of the lighthouse lantern room, Arthur gasped. Stepping back so quickly, his shoulder struck the brass railing. The image was gone, replaced by the clean, white sweep of light into the thick fog. He waited, heart hammering, eyes burning from the sudden light. He told himself it was an ocular trick, a light diffraction caused by the unique density of the sea fog and his own relentless solitude. He was a man of logic and routine, a keeper of the light, not a dreamer of shadows. He checked the lens, running his hand over the cold, flawless glass. No smudges, no cracks, nothing to explain the terrible vision. Yet the air in the lantern room was suddenly colder, thick with a metallic, burnt scent that was not from the lamp oil. Arthur retreated to the log room, the terror giving way to a frantic need for documentation. He wrote the details meticulously, framing the event in clinical terms. Refraction anomaly, 2347 hours. Image ephemeral, dark, suggestive of structural damage. He could not sleep. Below the lantern room and his cramped, stone-walled quarters, every sound was amplified, the groaning of the granite, the drip of seawater, the methodical, heavy clack-clack of the winding mechanism above. He kept picturing the face in the light, the eyes wide and terrified. He knew that face with the cold, dreadful certainty of a man meeting his fate. It was his own. He returned to the lantern room an hour before dawn, drawn by an irresistible, morbid curiosity. He stood waiting, watching the rhythmic sweep of the lens. The fog was thinning, the outline of the horizon becoming slightly visible. As the final darkness gave way to the bruised light of pre-dawn, the beam swept. And there it was again, clearer this time. Fixed within the white light for a terrifying, agonizing full-second dot, it was not a man. It was himself, but older, gaunt, his uniform shredded, lying on the shattered glass floor of the lantern room. But the image was more than a tableau of death. As the light held, Arthur could see, projected onto the wall of fog just beyond the window, a single, horrifying date, the 22nd of November 1995. The image flickered, convulsed, and then vanished, replaced by the rising sun. Today was the 21st of November. He hadn't seen a ghost. He had seen his own death, exactly 24 hours in the future. The rational man inside Arthur Pendelton shattered. He was a keeper of the light, but the light itself had turned into a terrifying, inescapable mirror of his own demise. He looked down at the lens, his reflection staring back. He could not run. He was trapped on the rock. He could not call for help. The radio was out due to the storm. There was only one terrible option. He had to disable the light. He had to break the mirror. He had to disrupt the beam that showed the future. Even if plunging the world into darkness meant failing his sacred duty. If you're gripped by the terrifying fate of the last keeper, please subscribe to Night World. Your support lights the way through the darkest haze. The cold clarity of predestination hit Arthur with the weight of the sea itself. The date was tomorrow. The place was here, in the lantern room, surrounded by splintered glass. The immediate, logical imperative was simple. If the light was the projection mechanism, then the light must be extinguished. The sacred duty to warn the ships was now secondary to the primal, desperate need to survive. He tried to shut down the main lamp immediately. He moved with a frantic energy that the solitude had long stolen from him. The mechanism was designed for resilience, for ceaseless function. The main lamp ran on a generator backed up by ancient, powerful batteries, and the lens rotation system was purely mechanical, driven by enormous weights. To stop the light required several heavy, deliberate steps. Arthur first attempted to hit the main breaker, but the heavy copper-handled switch was rusted solid. He knew forcing it would risk a catastrophic electrical fire, but he tried anyway, hauling on the handle until his fingers were raw. It wouldn't budge. The light continued its slow, mechanical sweep, a beacon of his doom. Next, he climbed the narrow, winding stairwell down to the generator room. The air here was thick with diesel fumes and the thrumming roar of the ancient engine. He found the fuel line, a thick brass pipe feeding the engine. He needed to cut the fuel, but the shut-off valve was also seized. He looked around the room, desperate. His eyes fell on a heavy pipe wrench mounted on the wall. He seized it, his muscles trembling with the cold and the fear. He had to sever the pipe. With a series of brutal, rhythmic swings, he smashed the wrench against the brass pipe, the noise deafening even over the generator. The pipe buckled, then finally fractured with a screech of tearing metal. Diesel fuel instantly erupted, spraying across the stone floor and onto the generator housing. The engine sputtered, roared one last time, and then died with a heavy final cough, plunging the lower tower into relative silence, a silence punctuated only by the drip of diesel and the ever-present groan of the waves, but the light did not die. The main bulb, designed to function during temporary power failures, instantly drew power from the massive battery bank located 2 floors below. The light continued to sweep, the lens mechanism still ticking with the relentless, unpowered rhythm of the clockwork. Arthur realized with a fresh wave of panic that the light was far more resilient than he was. He retreated to the clockwork room. The lens was rotated by a set of massive, tiered weights that dropped slowly through the central column of the lighthouse, requiring manual winding every 4 hours. To stop the lens, he had to stop the weights. The emergency brake lever was a heavy cast-iron handle designed to hold thousands of pounds of tension. He tried to pull it, but it was too stiff, too heavy. He ran to his desk, grabbing the logbook he'd started yesterday, frantic to find documentation of the braking procedure. Instead, his eyes fell upon the last entry Alistair Finch had written, The weight must fall, lest the eye remain open. Maintenance is paramount. The simple instruction was a cruel reminder of his failure. He grabbed a can of industrial penetrating oil and doused the mechanism of the brake handle. He waited 5 agonizing minutes, listening to the heavy clack-clack of the clockwork, counting the seconds until his doom. Then he braced his feet against the floor and pulled, summoning every ounce of his adrenaline-fueled strength. The lever groaned, protested with a terrible metallic shriek, and finally thumped into place. The rhythmic clack-clack of the mechanism stopped. The lens slowed, grinding to a halt. The rotation utterly ceased. The light beam was now fixed, a solid, unmoving column of pure white, aimed directly outward at the ocean and the thick morning fog. Arthur had managed to halt the rotation, but the light itself was still burning, drawing power from the massive, hidden batteries. He had broken the rhythm of the light, but the mirror was still open. He had averted the exact fate shown in the reflection, a death caused by shattered glass in the moving light, but he had created a new, terrifyingly fixed tableau. He climbed back to the lantern room. The air was heavy, the fixed beam a blinding white spear of energy. He stood beside the unmoving lens, peering into the focus light, watching the patch of fog where the beam struck. He waited for a new vision, a static, unmoving reflection of his new, imminent end dot, and the light delivered. Instead of his body, the beam now projected a static image of the interior of the entire lighthouse. Every stone, every stairwell, every dark corner, bathed in the blinding light. And within this illuminated, perfect reflection of the structure, Arthur saw a single clear, terrifying figure, a gaunt, oil-stained man, his eyes vacant, climbing the winding stairs toward the lantern room, armed with a heavy pipe wrench. It was himself from an hour ago, and he was coming to kill the man who had stopped the light. The fear turned cold, absolute. His fate was not an external event. It was internal, a self-fulfilling, time-delayed horror, a part of himself driven mad by the terror. Do you dare to keep watching as Arthur faces the reflection of his own madness? Be sure to subscribe to Night World so you don't miss a single terrifying turn of fate. The realization was a crushing psychological blow. The light was not just a projector of the future. It was a mirror of predestination, trapping a conscious self within a single, inescapable path. The man climbing the stairs, driven by rage and the need to break the light, was a fragment of Arthur's own psyche, propelled through time by the fixed lens, a horrifying temporal echo. Arthur knew he had a short window of time. The figure, the reflection of his desperate earlier self, was moving slowly, methodically. The granite tower amplified every sound. He could now hear the faint, scraping sound of the pipe wrench dragging along the stone steps, a sound that chilled him to the core because he knew exactly how and why that sound was being made. He had to move away from the light, away from the focus of the reflection. The lantern room was a trap. He descended 2 flights of stairs and entered the small, octagonal communications room, a stone box containing the dead radio equipment. He barricaded the heavy wooden door with a filing cabinet and an iron stool, the meager defense providing only a thin shield of false security. He stood in the darkness, flashlight off, listening intently to the sounds that tracked his movements. The scraping of the wrench continued its slow, upward trajectory. Arthur's mind raced. He had broken the mechanism, but the light itself, still burning, was projecting the inevitable chain of events he had already set in motion. He hadn't stopped his fate. He had solidified it by his own desperate actions. He began to search the communications room, looking for anything that could act as a deterrent, a weapon, or a path of escape. His hand swept across the cold, dusty equipment, finding nothing but dead metal. Then his fingers brushed against a coil of thick, braided copper wire, the antenna led for the powerful, long-range emergency radio transmitter. a system that ran on its own isolated battery bank, separate from the main light. An idea, insane and desperate, sparked in his mind. If the light could project an image, perhaps the powerful radio could project a signal, a temporal disruption, a plea that could reach before the moment of his death, or perhaps even reach the outside world. He knew the main radio was dead, but the emergency transmitter was still isolated and might hold residual power. He worked with frantic speed, stripping the copper wire, exposing the thick conductive core. He climbed onto the communications desk, reaching for the dead transmitter unit, a heavy, intimidating box of dials and vacuum tubes. He saw a small auxiliary power input, shielded by a brass plate. He tore the plate off and began to connect the copper wire directly to the internal circuitry, bypassing the main controls. He was hacking time, gambling his existence on a 20-year-old radio schematic he barely remembered. As he finished the connection, the scraping sound stopped directly outside the door. A heavy silence settled, then the distinct, heavy thud of the pipe wrench striking the wooden door. The filing cabinet shrieked as it was shoved back a foot. The attack had begun. Arthur didn't hesitate. He found the auxiliary power switch for the transmitter, a small, unmarked toggle, and flipped it. The radio unit came to life with a blinding, crackling blue flash, throwing a static-filled, high-pitched scream into the confined stone room. The copper wire in his hands began to heat instantly, burning his skin. The radio was transmitting a raw, undirected pulse of energy. He saw the effect instantly. On the wooden door, where the figure was relentlessly striking, the grain of the wood began to shimmer, the shape of the figure momentarily blurring. He was creating a temporal distortion, a bubble of interference against the pre-written future. He reached for the microphone, his voice raw, screaming into the static. "Stop the light. Disable the light. Don't let the weights fall." He was broadcasting a warning to himself, an earlier version of Arthur, a message to break the fatal chain before it ever began. The irony was exquisite and terrible. The only way to save himself was to warn a past version of himself to destroy the object that was currently threatening his life. The door shuddered violently, the wood cracking near the top hinge. The attack intensified, driven by the inescapable logic of the man with the pipe wrench. Arthur knew he couldn't hold the broadcast forever. The power drain was too massive. The blue crackling from the radio intensified, bathing the room in an unnatural humming light. Then, the floor of the room beneath his feet began to vibrate with a deep, unnatural frequency. The massive battery bank, 3 floors down, was beginning to fail, venting caustic gas under the massive strain of the emergency broadcast. Arthur had traded one immediate fate for another. He was about to be sealed in a collapsing, toxic tower with a mad reflection of himself trying to break in. The clock is ticking and the batteries are failing. Don't let the dark silence take you. Subscribe to Night World now and await the final broadcast. The blue, crackling light of the dying radio was the only illumination. The sound of the fracturing door was now drowned out by a high-pitched, screaming static emanating from the transmitter and the low, heavy groan of the stone structure itself. The battery acid smell was overpowering, a cold, chemical threat that stung Arthur's lungs. He yanked the burning copper wire from the radio, the raw electrical energy snapping against the stone wall. The scream of the static instantly died, replaced by the sound of the door splintering. Arthur knew he had only seconds before the door fell, and the figure, his angry, desperate, self-destructive echo entered. He raced up the remaining flights of stairs, carrying the scorched copper wire, determined to destroy the source of the paradox once and for all. He reached the lantern room. The air was filled with the oppressive, fixed white column of light, a blinding, unchanging beam cutting through the gloom. The massive lens, still aimed at the ocean, was the eye of his doom. Arthur climbed onto the catwalk, the metal cold beneath his feet. He could hear the final splintering of the communications room door below, followed by the heavy, rhythmic climb of the pipe wrench-wielding figure. There was no time for finesse. He had to extinguish the light at the source, the bulb itself. He threw the copper wire around the main electrical conduit leading into the massive, high-wattage lamp, quickly twisting the ends together. This was a direct short circuit, a suicide attempt on the light itself. The contact was instant and violent. The wire immediately glowed white-hot, and the entire lantern room was flooded with an agonizing, screeching sound of overloaded electricity. The massive light bulb flared, a blinding, world-ending supernova of white light, and then exploded with a deafening, shattering roar, sending fragments of superheated glass across the lantern room. The fixed column of light vanished, replaced by a sudden, absolute, consuming darkness dot in that instantaneous, profound blackness. The scraping sound on the stairs below stopped. The mad echo of Arthur, deprived of the light that powered its existence, was gone, dissolved back into the paradox. Arthur stood in the shattered darkness, deafened, his body stinging from minor glass shards, but undeniably alive. He had broken the mechanism of his fate. The tower was silent, save for the wind and the relentless crash of the sea. He turned on his flashlight, the weak, yellow beam revealing the devastation, the shattered lens housing, the smoking electrical conduit, the glass-strewn floor. He looked down the central shaft of the lighthouse. The clockwork was still, the weights held. The generator was dead. The batteries were failing. The lighthouse was blind, silent, and dying. He descended the stairs, finding the communications room door splintered inward, the iron stool lying twisted and useless on the floor. There was no one inside, no sign of the pipe wrench or the man, only the lingering metallic scent of ozone and diesel. He had successfully erased the most immediate future. Arthur spent the next few hours in a state of shock, documenting the wreckage, writing his final entry in a logbook. The 22nd of November 1995, light and clockwork mechanism irrevocably destroyed. Paradox resolved. Vessel neutralized. Awaiting relief. He dated it for the day he was supposed to die. Relief arrived 3 days later. The crew found the lighthouse dark and silent. They found Arthur Pendelton sitting in his quarters, thin and shaken but alive, surrounded by his instruments and the silent, broken remains of his life's work. He told them of the storm, the explosion, the failure of the old equipment, a rational lie built around an impossible, terrifying truth. He left the lighthouse forever, taking only his final logbook. He spent the rest of his life inland, never looking at the sea, never trusting a light, and never sleeping in absolute silence. He knew with an eternal certainty that he hadn't destroyed the paradox. He had merely delayed it. He knew the light had merely found a new way to project its inevitable, self-fulfilling prophecy. Years later, Arthur Pendelton died peacefully in his bed, miles from the ocean. But the Black Rock Lighthouse was never fully repaired. The great lens remained dark, locked in its unmoving, static position, a monument to his terrifying choice. And every few years, a mariner passing the abandoned rock would report seeing a single, brief, blinding flash of pure white light, fixed and unmoving, aimed directly at the lonely tower, as if a dead mirror had snapped back to life, broadcasting the final, terrifying truth across the empty sea. The lighthouse remained blind, but the paradox was always watching, waiting for the one moment of light to begin the cycle of self-destruction. Once more, this brings an end to the lighthouse keeper's last broadcast. If this cinematic nightmare of self-destruction held you captive, please ensure you hit the like button and subscribe to Night World. We'll see you in the next shadow.